it crosses the border, it's much cheaper. Actually, nice. I stay in the border of Botswana and South Africa. It's better for me to go and refill my car in Botswana than here in South Africa. Why? Because they don't pay the tax, the fuel levy. I have to pay the fuel levy. Their VAT is 14%. Mine is 15% going into 16%. Their income tax, Minister, is 25%. Mine is 45%. So it's disingenuous, really, to compare. And the list goes on and on. I can speak the whole day about these countries that you have listed here. So you can't say you did not increase it and therefore you only increase it. You've effectively increased the personal income tax. Petrol today is 22 rands. Let's look at it 3 months down the line, how much it's going to be. The price of bread. Let's look at, so you need to say the implications of us increasing this VAT will be felt by the same people that we are saying we're protecting them from the personal income tax. And you are not touching on the corporate tax, Minister. It was 29% previously. It was reduced by your own government to 27%. Why is it difficult for you to take it back to 29%? What is it that you are protecting so much on the corporate tax? Because, and SARS, that's where it comes in. This corporate tax has gone down. Yes, we agree that there hasn't been a lot of economic activities and companies are not doing well. But what about illicit financial flows? What about tax avoidance? What are we going to do to get these monies out from these companies that are avoiding tax and that are causing you, the SARS commissioner, not to collect revenue for our people? Chair, this Operation Vulindlela, by the way, Minister, it doesn't matter. You can change the name today and make it Operation Buladitsela. The reality is that it started in 2019. It was introduced in 2019. When you came in 2021, you changed the name to Operation Vulindlela. But it effectively does the same thing. You say you want to create jobs. You say you want to create state capacity, but you are introducing private sector. Even worse, you are saying you want to de-risk project that comes from the private sector. Who's going to bear the burden of that risk of this private sector? Why would your own government have so much faith in the private sector than in your own entities? Look at Transnet as an example. Transnet, not very long ago, by the way, less than 10 years ago, 6 years ago, I was there. We used to move over 200 million tons of cargo per year. Today, Transnet is only recording 150 million tons. What has happened? The bulk commodities still remain the same in the country. The rolling stock still remains the same in the country. The track rail still remains the same in the country. What has changed is management. So why would you think the private sector is going to come and assist Transnet to move cargo back to over 200 million? I see that you are ambitious. We're even saying 250 million tons. It's not going to happen. The issue is not the bulk commodities. The issue is not the railway network. The issue is not the rolling stock. The issue is the people that you have deployed at Transnet. That has got nothing to do with the private sector. Private sector will not bring rolling stock. If anything, what Ramasi is talking about, SAA as an example, you sold the aircrafts only to lease them back at the higher price. So that's exactly what you want to do, even with Transnet, because we are saying the private sector must come in. What are they coming in with? They are not bringing any skills. They are not bringing any roll stock. So what exactly are they going to do? And that's what Operation Vulindlela does in the railway sector, in the energy sector. They're not bringing anything. And you are saying you want to de-risk those projects. It's very wrong, Minister. Now, let's look at briefly. I know the chairperson is going to stop me very soon, which, by the way, it should not be the case, because we can't be limited to 5 minutes when you have spoken, when I mean for over an hour, and on a budget that is supposed to cater for 62 million people. If it means we have this meeting again for constant engagement, I'm saying we've got 3 months to have this thing. Otherwise, we are actually going to have even more problems. Chair, your foreign borrowing. You're prioritizing your foreign borrowing and not domestic borrowing. Why? And we've said this before. And by the way, the point that we are trying to make is, Minister, there's nothing wrong with borrowing money, but there's everything wrong with borrowing money to pay debt. Borrow money, create revenue generating projects for you to service that debt and still make more money for you to fund the same people. You spoke about 9,000 employees that were laid off, that you could not keep So basically you are saying, let's just keep the status quo and let's just continue moving on and hoping for a miracle. No, you should be saying with this budget, we'll be able to bring back those people and get more people, because the reality is that we need more people. We need more nurses, we need more doctors, we need more teachers. And it doesn't help, by the way, Minister, having more teachers, having more money for NSFAS, which is not going to plow back into the economy. What are we saying? Look at the model of China. China realized that we need engineers for us to industrialize and to create factories and whatnot. They send out students from China all across the world to go and train and become engineers, for them to come and work. What do we do in South Africa? We take NSFAS money, we give it to students to go study. After finishing studying, Chair, they come and stay at home and look at you. That's why 28 million people out of the 62 million people depend on you for SRD. We're saying, let's give this money, but let's create job opportunities so that these students can come and back and plow back into the economy. That's how you grow the economy. I've got a lot to add, Chair, because essentially, we agree that we need to make it work for all of us. We are in a crisis, and this crisis was brought by the former liberation movement. But we are happy that we are here to make a contribution, because we want to see this South Africa. We don't have any other home. We don't have the luxury of being called to be refugees in America. This is our home. We have to make it work.
If there's still time, you will get a second round, if the time allows. Thank you very much. Next, Honorable Member.
Thank you very much, Chair, and to the Minister and to all colleagues and National Treasurer and everyone present here today. My name is now Tambo. I'm a Member of Parliament deployed by the Economic Freedom Fighters. So I think I must begin by stating that there's a lot of, there's an attempt to create an impression that we must all take collective responsibility for the shortfalls in revenue generation and the challenges facing our economy. And I think it's completely unfair. And I think the first budget speech by the minister, which was unfortunately leaked, as he said, was much more explicit in telling us that the avenues they've exhausted to try to stimulate economic growth, which have failed and which the EFF would told you over the past 10 years would fail. Because in your attempt to ring fence us and corner us into only using an increase to VAT as an option, you mentioned that we cannot continue to pursue the route of budget cuts to critical services, which is essentially austerity, which we warned you against. You mentioned that we cannot continue, and that doesn't even need you to mention, that we cannot continue with the reckless and irresponsible levels of borrowing that we've been pursuing, which, by the way, we see no outputs or productive outcomes of. There's been constant borrowing. We are sitting with this high and ballooning debt service costs today, an accumulated debt, but we don't see the practical and meaningful infrastructure developments that come out of it. And therefore, you also state, and perhaps a sort of fault of yours, or you borrow and then you allocate monies and then they get looted in various sectors of our society. But we can't continue to pursue that route, and that was also approaches that were pursued by National Treasury's planning, which have failed, and now we're sitting with ballooning debt service costs. Now we're left with taxation as an option, and we want to tell you it is also going to be a failure, because taxation cannot stimulate economic growth, and it cannot be your approach to sort of determine how you're going to resolve your expenditure costs. It's not sustainable. So there's no long-term framework of how you're going to generate revenue. And it's as if all of these items are new expenditure items. The social relief distress grant is not a new expenditure item. Health is not a new expenditure item. Education is not a new expenditure item. But you present everything to us as if it is a crisis, because you have exhausted failed mechanisms which you decidedly considered were failed mechanisms which were borrowing and austerity in the past. And now taxation is the last option. And we should say today categorically that it's also going to fail. So all of these projections and presumptions that National Treasury works on do not seem to have long-term thinking in mind as to how the economy is going to be stimulated. And this applies also to your projections around economic growth. They are constantly revised downwards. So I see now it says 1.8%. I'm sure when you present the midterm budget, you're going to tell us it's been revised down from that 1.8%, because that has been the trend over the past couple of years. So the attempt to make us take collective responsibility for National Treasury's incompetency and poor planning is incorrect. And the attempt to make us, to blackmail us into a corner that we all have to take these trade-offs in order for people to receive services, whether it's health or education. It's trade-offs that are consequences of poor fiscal planning. And that poor fiscal planning is not a resultant of collective responsibility of parliamentarians or the people of South Africa. So I needed to state that point. And you continue with these presumptions because Operation Vulindlela presumes that the private sector is going to meaningfully stimulate and grow the economy. You've introduced credit guarantees to them that protects them from risk. You're telling us about global risks where you have to ensure, where people are afraid of global risks which entail fear of protectionist industries or protectionist practices by South Africa, as if we're not supposed to protect our local industries. It's incorrect. So you base your entire fiscal planning on private sector investment when the private sector has proven that it is practicing illicit financial flows, tax avoidance, and profit shifting, and base erosion. So, and then you tell us that we're already transitioning to phase 2 of Operation Vulindlela. Can we get the outcomes of phase 1? We're proceeding to phase 2 of Operation Vulindlela. That is fine. What have been the productive outcomes of phase 1 of Operation Vulindlela? Because it cannot be that you're constantly presenting new presumptions and we must adopt them, and then they end up failing. So let's have National Treasury take responsibility for that. What have been the outcomes of the excessive borrowing that now we're sitting with debt service costs? Tell South Africans, why do we have such high debt service costs and how has that impacted on their lives productively? We can have debt, we accept that. We accumulated that debt to serve what purpose, and what can our people point to that has alleviated or changed in their lives that has resulted in these high debt service costs? We've cut budgets and it's not our responsibility. It's the planning of Treasury which was based on austerity. I'm interested on why we continue to call state-owned companies when there seems to be an adopted political policy that we're not going to conduct what you call bailouts. Why do we characterize state-owned companies the same way that we characterize private companies, which would require bailouts operating in South Africa? Because if it is a state-owned company, we surely should be exploring possibly year-on-year allocations for developmental purposes to these state-owned entities, because their point of existence should not be profit. Their point of existence is to be able to service our people, provide reliable railway network services, provide reliable water services, provide reliable freight and airway services, provide reliable energy supply and generation. So to characterize them as bailouts is to ostensibly create a situation where privatization is the only option, because you're saying you want to stop providing bailouts to these institutions. So why are they still called state-owned entities? Because they are responsible, they should be part of the fiscal planning of the state on a year-on-year basis if we're seeing the state-owned entities. Otherwise, they've stopped becoming that, they've stopped being that. So
I'm going to request that you start wrapping up.
Yeah, I start by concluding.
No, yes, you must talk to us
Okay,
on-
no, it's fine. And I think perhaps the final point I must make is that hopefully we'll get a second bite. 3 hours is not going to be sufficient for us to deliberate on what we're proposing. We can even sit through the weekend if necessary, but 3 hours is extremely insufficient, because the final point, sorry, Chair, the final point is, what is the logic of the equitable share allocations? Surely there should be a pursuing of revising of how we allocate budgets to provinces and municipalities. Municipalities are the cold face of service delivery. So this added layer of administration, which is provinces, why does it get more allocations as opposed to municipalities, which are supposed to be at the cold face of service delivery? I think we're curious about that, and perhaps we should think about reviewing that, and hopefully we'll get a second bite. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Next, Honorable Member.
Minister, Deputy Minister, DG, Commissioner. So, Minister, I have to compliment you on the extra money to SARS. You've spoken about it, but I don't see it in your expenditure. It talks about 3.5 million in the medium term. So the tables haven't been updated. But I want to compliment you because you've listened to me. It's an issue, the very first issue I've raised in government. It stuck out to me like a sore nail that we're leaving so much money on the table. So I compliment you for listening. It's not only a victory for Action SA, but more importantly, a victory for South Africans, the honest paying taxpayers. So I really compliment you, and I do think it can be a game changer. It's now over to the Commissioner and his team, but we back them and we're grateful for the work they're doing. You know, they collect 90% of our government revenue. If any organization needs to be properly equipped, it's SARS. So I compliment you on that, and I thank you for listening. It's huge, and on behalf of South Africans, thank you. The other thing too, as a constructive opposition, when things are good, we need to say it's good. And I think the ECD, increased money to ECD is imperative. I read a study many years ago. World Bank says it's the greatest investment you can do as an ECD. So I think that needs to be acknowledged and say, well done on that. And then the other area that I'm going to implore you, Minister, you listened to me last time and I hope you listen to me again, is that I sit on scope and I sit on the Auditor General, and it's patently clear that there's just too much wastage, corruption, and incompetence in the system in government departments and entities. It's like a bucket. It's pointless filling the bucket up with water if it's got a massive hole in it, because it's just going to keep running out. And that's what's actually happening at the moment. I mean, in scope of the last couple of weeks, it's been horrific. Just two examples is a compensation fund and the UIF fund. Combined revenues of 46 billion. 46 billion. So it's huge amounts of money. They're cesspool of corruption, incompetence, and wastage. The compensation fund has had a disclaimed audit report for 12 years. The first comment the Auditor General says is there is a total breakdown of internal controls, not just a little breakdown, total. So there's so much money going out the door. And I think we wouldn't have to have tax increases if we could cut the leakage. And I'm happy to engage with you and give you some thoughts about it. And if we could ring fence some money, and the AG said to her, she was quite exasperated the other day, and I said, what is the one thing you would like to see? And she said she would like to see corrupt officials in orange overalls, because until there's accountability and consequence management, the money will keep going out the back door. So we would like to see money ring fence for corruption, disciplinary hearings, and fast track that. So that is huge. And I know you can't do anything about this, Finance Minister, but they say a fish rots from their head. You know, our cabinet is the most bloated cabinet we've got, and the cabinet ministers live a life of opulence. The Minister of Human Settlement spent one night in overseas, 198,000 for one night's accommodation. That could have built a house for one family for the rest of their lives. So, and if we're asking society to tighten their belts, it must start at the top. We have to lead by example. And I think that's important. We need to clamp down on the international travel and overseas lifestyle, because we can't ask other people to do it. We can't ask ordinary South Africans to tighten their belt when the cabinet is living a life of opulence and luxury lifestyle. Thank you.